I think AFEX, I definitely think commodities. I think that's essentially in our DNA. But I also think Africa prosperity, the capacity to use the power of commodities to then enrich the lives of Africans.
I'll put AFEX as an entity that is out there to revolutionize the operations, the activities in the commodities ecosystem in Nigeria.
AFEX is a solutions provider. We come up with innovative ways to solve issues that arise for people participating in the commodity space.
AFEX is a licensed commodities exchange. It's the first licensed commodities exchange in Nigeria. It's a capital market operator where we provide efficient trade and settlement of commodities.
I'm basically an entity that supports the evolution of the market as it is right now to one that would be globally competitive and positioned to set the country and the continent on the path to supporting commodities trading.
In 2021, we are doing different things in a more strategic way.
We're going with a much more laser-focused approach in terms of addressing all the issues we've identified over the last 5 to 6 years, right?
Fundamentally, this year will be the year where we start to build ecosystems around technology, around financing, and around the commodities market more broadly.
AFEX is doing so many things to change the face of agriculture.
As opposed to pursuing a broad strategy, we now have structures in place to deliver targeted strategy to focus on key segments and key aspects of the value chain.
We'll be going into new value chains and also a greater focus on the local market as well, and seeing if we can expand our reach down to the medium and small players in the space as well.
Before I say what we're doing differently, I'll say what we have done past 5 years, which is really to establish the infrastructure that will then support our solutions around providing access to market, access to storage, and access to finance.
AFEX in 2021 is leveraging on its 5-year plan, which we tag as Project Black Elephant, to ensure that we scale on a 10x basis.
In 2021, AFEX has then gone through a process I would say is unbundling what we had as an exchange into 3 entities to operate independently of each other.
So what we're doing differently this year is to do a lot of market education to get market participants ready to adopt services and solutions beyond agriculture that we are known for into solid minerals and energy.
AFEX will be breaking into different businesses.
The first is AFEX Commodities Exchange, like I explained earlier, to handle the commodities ecosystem. All commodities now fully integrated, both your spot market and your derivatives market.
We will be piloting a lot of activities in derivatives trading, right? And we'll be introducing a couple of more interesting fixed income products that would be listed on the exchange and will be available for players in the ecosystem to trade.
Second, we have to have a financial solution that works for Africa. One that works from a structuring, from a tenor, from a pricing standpoint for the continent and for the commodities value chain that we're interested in.
We have AFEX Investment Limited, which is structured to increase the engagement with capital markets operators in designing sophisticated products that would diversify their investment base, right? Last year we did the asset-backed commercial paper. This year we're looking at growing that base and then being able to increase the pool of investors there.
Fundamentally, then, we need a market, an efficient market system that is not, it's fair, it's transparent, and it promotes equality. It's also very tech-enabled.
AFEX Fair Trade Limited will be bridging the gap and improving the livelihood of farmers through input financing, through access to output markets, and also provide storage for their commodities.
Fundamentally, we understand that to have an Africa that can trade with the rest of the world but also can feed itself, we essentially need to have 3 core powerhouses, which essentially becomes our base.
Good morning and welcome. We welcome everyone, or good afternoon, apologies. We welcome everyone to this session, the webinar organized by the AFEX Commodities Exchange Limited. It's a webinar designed to be an engaging session, capturing the entire ecosystem of regulators, operators, and exchanges operating in the commodities market in Nigeria. The webinar will seek to achieve 3 objectives. 1, discuss the concept of securitization and its use in the commodities market in Nigeria. Provide detailed expression of the implementation of securitization in Nigeria. Expatiate on the benefits of securitized products to the commodities market in Nigeria. This promises to be an engaging, informative, and practicable session, as we would like to have actionable takeaways. My name is Olayemeka Bolo, and I will be your moderator for today. In the house today, we have subject matter experts. Each of these experts are key stakeholders needed for a successful and seamless commodities securitization process. We have in the house, Madam Daisy Ekineh, the Chairperson, Technical Committee, Commodities Ecosystem of the Nigerian Securities and Exchange Commission, Mr. Agama Emomotimi, the Head Registration, Exchanges and Market Innovation of the Nigerian Securities and Exchange Commission, Mr. Sonny Ayere, the Chief Executive Officer of Don Lauren Merrifield, and of course our host, Mr. Ayodeji Balogun, the Chief Executive of AFEX Commodities Exchange Limited. As we start the sessions, I'll be taking a brief bio of each of our key stakeholders as they come up to speak. Before we start, please note the following house rules. Please stay muted and switch off all videos during the session. Please type your questions for the panelists in the chat section. These will be taken during the panel session. This webinar is scheduled for 1.5 hours, and we will do our best to keep to time. I will quickly run through the events flow, and what is planned for today will start with the opening remark by Madam Daisy Ekineh, the keynote speech by Mr. Agama Emomotimi, and the panel session. Our panelists for today will be Mr. Agama Emomotimi, Mr. Ayodeji Balogun, and Mr. Sonny Ayere. Then, of course, we'll have the question and answer session and our closing remark. So please stay engaged and enjoy the session. To kick off the webinar, we will start with the opening remark from Madam Daisy Ekineh. For a brief bio, Daisy Ekineh holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics and a Master of Arts degree in Development Studies from Ohio University. She has over 30 years of experience in capital markets and was Executive Commissioner of Operations in the Securities and Exchange Commission. Ms. Ekineh has served in several committees, including the Technical Committee of the Bond Market Steering Committee and the Nigerian Economic Summit Group Non-Oil Agriculture Subcommittees, and was for several years the chairman of the Information Sharing Subcommittee of the Financial Services Regulation Coordinating Committee, that's the FSRCC. She also played a major role in designing the capital market and regulation strategy of the Financial Sector Strategy 2020. She was at one time chair of the African and Middle East Regional Committee of the International Organization of Securities Commission, IOSCO. Ms. Ekineh played a critical role in several policy initiatives in the Nigerian capital market and has written widely. Please welcome with me, Madam Daisy Ekineh.
Thank you very much. You can hear me, I'm sure.
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much.
Very clearly, madam.
It's a long time. And thank you, everybody. Let me just welcome everybody to this webinar. I think it's a very important one. And I'm sure at the end of the day, we would have identified all the issues, and found solutions to them as well, and start working on whatever, solutions we think, would assist in developing the securitization market and the capital market. Okay, so I'll just begin, by thanking AFEX for the invitation to do this opening remarks, at this important webinar, which is on securitization and operational imperatives, which is very important because we actually need to understand what the operational imperatives are for us to move on, better, with the securitization. I would also like to thank AFEX, to commend AFEX actually, for the dynamism, the creativity, and the passion, it has brought to the commodities ecosystem. I believe as a people, there is a clear consensus and indeed a sense of urgency, to diversify the Nigerian economy if we must attain the desired socio-economic growth and development in an increasingly competitive world. With a teeming population estimated at about 70% of the population, a median age of 18 years, unemployment rate of 33.5%, and when you look at the age group of 15 to 24, it's an unemployment rate of 52%, which is quite high. Also, an annual average population growth of 22.6% and a high poverty rate. We obviously have no choice but to rapidly diversify the Nigerian economy through the development of the commodities and the other non-oil sectors. There is no gainsaying that developing the commodities markets would have immense economic benefits, such as job creation, FX provision, export promotion, industrial and rural development, and help mitigate economic shocks from over-reliance on one sector, which is oil. There is no doubt also that efforts have been made by the federal government and its agencies to diversify the economy away from oil through various policy initiatives. Many of these policies and initiatives, have been focused on the commodities ecosystem. However, it is imperative to ensure that the right environment is created to encourage private sector, to play in the market. Perhaps most notable of the initiatives are the intervention programs by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Also, the SEC, understanding its role in fostering the growth and development of the economy through the capital market, has also introduced a number of initiatives to boost the market. You all are aware that, some years ago, the SEC set up the Commodities Ecosystem Committee, to look at the ecosystem as a whole and then come up with some recommendations that would help strengthen the ecosystem. The report was submitted to the SEC, and the SEC thereafter set up an implementation committee. The implementation committee, is working on all the recommendations that have been made. And some of them have actually been implemented and some are still work in progress. To develop we also know that the commodities exchanges are very, very critical to the development of the ecosystem itself. And this is very obvious if we look around the world. And I'm sure the American economy wouldn't have been what it is today without the commodities exchanges. Same, with Europe, and in India, is extensively benefiting from their commodities exchange. And so it's very important, to develop the commodities exchange. And this requires everybody's collaboration, both government and the private sector and the regulators, to ensure that we have very strong commodities exchanges that can add a lot of benefit, to the economy, particularly now that the we're moving out of oil, and we believe that we should, strengthen the non-oil sectors. Commodity is a very veritable area, to focus on to develop, the economy. And like I said earlier, there are so many benefits to it, including job creation and all that. So, but there are building blocks that are necessary for the development of the commodities exchanges and the ecosystem as a whole. One of such building blocks is the existence of a range of financial instruments. Obviously, without financial instruments, you actually don't even have a market. So financial instruments are very important, and financial instruments must also deal with all participants, whatever they think that they need the financial instrument for. So it's very, very important to ensure that we are developing financial instruments that will meet the appetite of participants in the market. If we don't develop financial instruments that meet the various participants' appetite, then it will be of no use. And so the exchanges must develop several instruments, because participants have different appetites. So those instruments must be important to deal with each person's appetite. There are traditional financial instruments for commodities exchanges. We're aware of the options, the futures, the commodities ETFs, the commodities ABS, and other securitized instruments. And I'm happy today that we're really focusing on securitization, so that we can develop instruments around it that would deal with, participants, so if processors decide that they need to, securitize, some of their assets, would have had all that it takes to enable us develop the instruments for them. And that's why I think this particular webinar we're having today is very, very important. So securitization would naturally enable investment capital, to be pulled into the commodities ecosystem and bolster its development, as well as the development of the Nigerian economy. Securitization would also bring several benefits, to participants, and these would include portfolio diversification and liquidity. Also, the layering of the assets, can appeal to investors with different risk appetite, like I said earlier. Of course, the risk in the pool of the assets, to be securitized can be lowered, through credit enhancement to make them more attractive. However, there are also downsides to securitization. I think we all remember what happened in 2008, the global financial crisis, and the bulk of it was actually blamed on securitization. And as a result of that, today, regulators have come up with a lot of regulations around securitization to ensure that they mitigate the risk around it. And even operators and regulations are still being developed. Recently, the EU developed, I think it's still a work in progress, regulations around securitization. So we have to study what's also happening elsewhere and make sure that, we can introduce mitigants in the market, around securitization, so that it becomes interesting. Because one of the problems that a lot of people have is that they don't understand it, and they think it's also very complex. And so the tendency is to run away from securitization. And to a lot of people, securitization actually is synonymous with risk. And so this webinar is important, to let people understand that, yeah, there are risks around securitization, but these risks can also be mitigated in several ways. And the regulators are also there with a lot of regulations that they have introduced. So capacity is another thing that we need to build around securitization. I know that in Nigeria, we have had some securitized products. So we have operators, that have built competencies around securitization. We also have rating agencies, that have also built competencies around it. The market as a whole needs to build competencies around it. The SEC has competencies as well, obviously, because they've got to deal with applications around securitization. And I know as a matter of fact that, a lot of capacity has been built in that area. And there are rules, which they have developed also, around securitization. But then these rules should be, examined from time to time. It should be reviewed from time to time based on experiences that, they've noticed in the market. The SEC has an umbrella view. And so whatever the safeguards that needs to be put in place to ensure that, securitization is properly done and confidence is built around it. And we have people that can, really come up with securitization transactions that would meet the requirements of participants. So I believe that, we've got originators, we've got the exchanges, we've got market operators, we've got market consultants, we've got the rating agencies. We also have the SEC. So I believe we have all these group of people represented at this webinar. And so I have no doubt that at the end of the day, we're going to come up with very good recommendations that the SEC and all participants would ensure, are introduced to strengthen securitization as a whole. So I would recommend that, these should be brought to bear at this webinar. And then we should also not forget, the international practices and new regulations, as I said earlier, in some jurisdictions, and see what we can bring into our market. All these should ultimately better the operations of securitization transactions in Nigeria and develop the commodities ecosystem. The key thing is the development of the commodities ecosystem and the Nigerian economy. And I think all hands should be on deck, to do that. So on this note, I want to thank AFEX and then welcome everybody, to this webinar. And I'm sure all of us will look forward to the recommendations, for implementation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Ekineh. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So following on, we'll go to our core presentation on securitization and its intricacies. This will be a 30-minute presentation on the topic of securitization and its intricacies that define the implementation of the concept in finance. The keynote will be handled by a seasoned professional in the industry with a broad-based experience in the development and implementation of securitized products in Nigeria. Please welcome with me Mr. Agama Emomotimi. Mr. Agama is the head of the Registration, Exchange, Market and Innovation Department at the Nigerian Securities and Exchange Commission, with over 20 years of experience in the financial markets. Prior to this with the Commission, he has worked in positions such as Senior Financial Analyst, Special Assistant to Executive Commissioner Operations, and Deputy Director Head Exchanges. He is a fellow of the prestigious Milken Institute, having been seconded to the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States. Mr. Agama has been crucial to a number of regulatory and operational policies in the commodities market, having grown the ecosystem from 1 commodity exchange to 5, as we currently have it in the country. Please welcome with me, Mr. Agama Emomotimi.
Well, thank you so much, Olami Yimka Bolo, for such glowing presentation of myself. I'm not sure I'm not what you tried to describe here, but I'm fortunate enough to have my model, my teacher, my mentor, making the presentation, the welcome address. And of course, I'm confident that I'm going to do her proud, as every child will want to do their mother proud. Thank you very much, Mommy Ekineh, for being here with us. And to AFEX, thanks again for the opportunity to share the little that I know with regards to securitization. And I can tell you clearly that this knowledge did not come by accident. And once again, it is actually due to the very strong interest of Ms. Daisy Ekineh, who had always been my boss and continues to be my boss, wanting us to learn and to really understand what these things are, because oftentimes you don't learn them in the university. So after over 30 years post-graduation experience, one begins to wonder, when will we have to stop learning? But I've always known that there will never be a time where I will stop learning. That learning is a continuous effort, not until I go below 6 feet. So on this note, can I have my slides on? Yeah, so thank you. So the topic is securitization and the operational imperatives. So the question is, what do we really mean by that? Is it just one jargon that we've decided to put together in order to impress somebody who probably didn't go to school? However, looking at it really, it scares anybody that is not initiated. Securitization, is it talking about security? Or what is it really talking about? What do we mean? How does something with such, a long spelling have anything to do with money? The spelling of money is very short. The securitization is quite long. Then AFEX now added operational imperatives. So then, is that what I will be dealing with? Clearly, the idea is to possibly give an appetizer to what it is. Because from studies, it is seen and known that securitization is a wide subject. But beyond being a wide subject, it's a financial instrument of the future. And that is credited to Vinod Kothari, who was my teacher and a foremost securitization expert in the world. Can we move to the next page, please? Hello? Okay, great. So what have we tried to do at the SEC? So as a background, Nigeria does not have a securitization law as we speak today, like it is available in most jurisdictions. However, the Investment and Securities Act 2007 provides the SEC the powers to create rules regarding financial instruments. And securitization is a financial instrument. So on the premise of that, the securitization rules of the SEC presents a comprehensive regulatory and fiscal framework to encourage securitization business. The securitization was devised to facilitate capital market transactions and or intra-group transactions, or a combination of both, but can also be used in the context of restructuring. So that is what it is. It is an ability to loosen complex issues or to provide an opening where it does not necessarily exist. How do we recreate financial instruments in order for us to provide the basis of finance, which is about liquidity? So the benefits of securitization, like we should know, is a catalyst for additional lending to real economy. How do we provide funding to the economy? Not through the traditional methods of lending, which is known to everybody. How do we unlock finance that is oftentimes jailed in so many homes, so many instruments, and so many activities of financial transactions? How do we transfer risks of loans to banks or long-term investors? How do we get those loans out of the balance sheet of banks in order that the banks will be free enough to do more lending? In fact, securitization is the main ingredient in money creation and monetary policy. But very few people know about it, because if you have to create money and you have to move to what we call the multipliers principle, then there must be an avenue, there must be a leeway for that to continually happen. It is very crucial to the economy to allow banks to extend new loans to businesses and households. What will do that for us? That is securitization. These are the very, very strong benefits of securitization. But have we explored this beautiful bride in the field of agriculture? Have we explored this beautiful bride in the field of financing agriculture, financing smallholder farmers? Not really, especially in this part of the world. Have we actually even explored the value or the beauty of securitization in this part of the world? We have hardly done so. We have had very, very, very few issuances, if we would definitely be able to count them by the fingers. So it is important that we begin to understand that rather than limiting ourselves, we should create opportunities, and those opportunities are created via an instrument like securitization, a process like securitization, which creates instruments that are important for the unlocking of agricultural potentials, financing potentials. Please move on. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The question is securitization also structured finance? Yes, it's something that we want to ask. Indeed, there is not much difference. There is only a very, very thin line. So if you are securitizing, you are all actually structuring finance. And what does it do? Advance of funds to enterprises to finance inputs, production, and accompanying support operations using certain types of securities that are not normally accepted by banks or investors, and which are more dependent on the structure and performance of the transaction rather than the characteristics, e.g., creditworthiness of the borrower. This is very, very important in the space that we are discussing in. The major challenge of the farmers, the smallholder farmers, is the fact that they are not creditworthy to go to any bank, to go to any finance institution, to meet anybody, to get any loan. Because for Africa, and indeed Nigeria, most of the smallholder farmers are not people that own collaterals that are creditworthy, that the banks will want to be their bride. Of course, the banks will not even touch them with a very, very long spoon. So clearly, what you need to emancipate this group of smallholder farmers or this group of persons cannot be anything less than structured finance, securitization, as the case may be. So structured finance is a collection of financial instruments that can be arranged in different ways depending on the nature of the underlying physical condition. So when we speak to agriculture, when we speak to agribusiness, one of the critical aspects of agribusiness is the availability of a commodity, availability of a natural collateral. But because of the nature of that natural collateral, oftentimes banks and financial institutions do not see the value. Rather, they see the challenge associated with warehousing, associated with storage, associated with logistics, associated with the pain points in the agribusiness. However, securitization, structured finance will certainly be able to come to their rescue. Move on, please. Next slide, please. So it is also important that as we try to understand this concept of securitization, we also need to understand the environment, the operating environment, which is more or less the operating imperatives. Due to the difficulty farmers face in getting credit and investments, adoption of structured finance techniques is being encouraged, like I emphasized just now. Most farmers, traders, and agribusinesses don't have the required collateral, physical collateral, or credit rating to attract finance from banks or be attractive to investors. Therefore, it is important to introduce security elements that places emphasis on the likely performance of the whole transaction instead of the creditworthiness of the borrower. Today, one tradition that is fast becoming, one action that is fast becoming a tradition is the number of agribusinesses or agri crowdfunding platforms or DCIPs, digital commodities investment platforms, that have continually promised high returns on the back of agricultural practices or agricultural production. The SEC does not encourage guaranteed promises in any investment. However, it is also not far from the truth that if properly harnessed, agriculture is a better way of returns on investments than most other types of investments, but not a guaranteed return. The risk is there, and the risk must be mitigated while we try as much as possible to provide the returns that the investor will naturally want. Move on, please. Next slide, please. Hello. So general features of structured finance, it assesses performance of the underlying transaction. It does not depend on the conventional loan collateral owned by the borrower. Entry and exit points for finance and identified based on underlying commodity transactions. Many SF arrangements, structured finance arrangements, have built-in mechanisms for self-liquidation at some stage of the value chain. And that is why securitization is like a Siamese twins to agriculture. It is the best avenue to unlocking finance for agriculture. So it's so important because with it, there is going to be a revolution that will bring about an evolution for the commodities trading ecosystem. And the desire to understand this and the zeal to understanding the practicability of this mode of financing agriculture will be very, very instrumental to the agricultural revolution that we all aim for and hope for in the diversification of the Nigerian economy. Let's move on, please. Move on. Next stage. Okay. So this is a description of the structured finance and related enhancement by categories. Supplier finance, funds advanced to supply wholesalers or retailers, securitization itself, which is structured finance, cash flow, producing financial assets are pooled and repacked into securities that are sold to investors. This is the more popular form of securitization, where receivables are pooled as a result of transactions and packed together, packing bonds into various packages and then reselling each one depending on the structure and the characteristics you give to each of this package. Whereas we sit, financier provides a credit to a seller against the security of goods in an independently controlled warehouse. These are all forms of securitization. These are all forms of structured finance, because in this way, you are able to use an underlying instrument in unlocking capital or finance that is required for the financing of the smallholder farmers, or at best, the independent farmers, as you want to call them. Move on, please. Next slide, please. What would be an enabling environment for structured finance? The health of the agricultural agribusiness sector, the overall operating environment, and the legal framework, and the capacity of the people, companies, and institutions involved is the foundation for applying structured finance or securitization to agriculture. When you speak to the word operational imperatives, you cannot operate securitization or structured finance in a disjointed environment. The rules must be there. The investors must be educated, and the practitioners must also be knowledgeable. Because if you do not have all of this in place, then certainly you are not able to succeed. So one of the key drivers for securitization or structured finance is how well we know or how much we know. And that is why a discussion of this nature is very, very important, in order that people are brought to the understanding that for you to be able to structure this product, for you to be able to invest in this product, and for you to be able to regulate this product, there is a strong need for knowledge. Structured finance instrument depends upon the characteristics, strengths of each value chain. Agricultural value chains vary in their depending on the nature of the product. So this provides a large space and a large scope for operations, because for each commodity, you cannot securitize the receivables in each commodity the way you securitize the receivables in the other commodity. So every commodity has a specific characteristic that is tied into the product that you are securitizing, or the receivables in every particular commodity. There are some commodities that their gestation period is 3 months. some are 6 months, some are 1 year, some are much more than that. So all of these characteristics are important in the product that you want to securitize. And so it is important to note that for an environment, for a structured finance environment, it must have all of these characteristics in order for us to be able to have sources. And the kind of sources we desire, the kind of sources that will change the landscape, and the kind of sources that will revolutionize agriculture. Move on, please. Next slide, please. Coordination of farmers, processors, marketing companies reduces risk and transaction costs of individual actors within the agricultural value chain. One thing that we will give to AFEX is that since inception, it has been doing a lot of foundational work. And we are happy that we have increased the number of exchanges we have registered at the SEC, because more people are now available to do this work together with AFEX. Because if we lose out in the foundation, then we are lost out completely. The Commodities Trading Ecosystem report, chaired by Ms. Ekineh, its implementation committee, chaired by Ms. Ekineh, is doing so much to getting all of this to happen. Coordination of farmers, coordination of processors, and marketing companies, in order that we all come and sit on the same table to be able to identify our challenges and deal with those challenges in order that the blockchain of the value chain is dealt with and healed from the beginning to the ending. A marketing or food processing company has better knowledge of the industry products, constraints, and risks better than a bank. Even a specialized agricultural bank, lack of understanding of this sector means a bank will not offer finance. So the reason why most of them are not offering finance, or are not even interested in the sector, is because they don't know. And not until we get them to understand that this is a specialized area, but very interesting, we need to cut them to understanding this and bringing them into the system to appreciate what we are trying to do, and providing an avenue for them to even make more money. Because the days of armchair banking is gone. We must start thinking out of the box in order to create instruments that will be both beneficial to both the smallholder farmers and the banks themselves. Then it becomes viable to structure finance according to the value chain, often building the finance around the strength of the stronger and more bankable participants in the chain. Move on, please. Next slide, please. I'll try to be faster because I know that time is almost fast spent. Securitization, indeed, is an effective way to leverage banks through refinancing and restructuring of loan portfolios. Securitization is, of course, the financial instrument of the future, but yet not now. Securitization provides additional investment opportunities for institutional investors. Securitization helps banks restructure their balance sheets and transfer the credit risk of exposure to the wider capital market. Of course, securitization serves as a solution to non-performing private equity and illiquid hedge funds. Securitization provides an avenue for financing agriculture. What are the opportunities? The additional opportunities are, it provides investment opportunities for institutional investors with differing asset diversification, risk and returns, and duration profiles. Enables conversion from illiquid to liquid securities. Allows investors gain exposure to different asset classes, such as agriculture, real estate, shipping, consumer finance, and what have you. Present untapped opportunities for banks in Nigeria seeking to adopt new business model or broaden the appeal of their product range for professional investors and high net worth clients. These are strong points that any bank should run with. And once you are able to do that, you are not only going to be able to improve your balance sheet, you are also going to be able to improve the economy. Banks should not just be deposit takers. Banks should be enablers. Banks should be developers. Banks should be institutional pillars that will help this sector grow and indeed to diversify the Nigerian economy. Move on, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Poor assessments and why the bad name. Of course, one of the reasons why a lot of people run away from securitization is because somehow, securitization as an instrument or as a process has become a little bit unfortunate after the GFC crisis of 2008. So, due to what? Poor assessment and monitoring of the creditworthiness of the underlying mortgage borrowers, which was basically an issue for mortgage, inadequately structured incentive structures for sponsors and originators, and complex securitization and securitization processes such as collateralized debt, loan and loan obligation, limited disclosure requirements, impairing the ability of investors to understand the associated risk, and over-reliance on credit agencies which were being paid by sponsors and originators. These are the reasons why securitization became something like a poison, and everybody was trying to run away from that very interesting instrument. However, all of these things, or most of these issues, have been taken care of now. But more importantly, for agriculture, it's a different ballgame. And that is why it is important that there is a complete understanding of what securitization is and what it is to agriculture, and how it can facilitate financing in agriculture and the development of that sector particularly. Move to the next slide, please. What is the Nigerian landscape looking like? The Securities and Exchange Commission, in its attempt to deepen the Nigerian capital market, has taken a positive look to this all-important financial innovation that seems yet to be understood even to date, and intends to restart securitization despite the stigma it suffers. The SEC, as far back as 2002, had proposed rules on securitization and subsequently went through the process of rulemaking, got that rule passed, and it has been lying in our books. But unfortunately, how many companies, how many capital market operators have seized this opportunity? Very, very few. So like I said earlier, you can count how many securitization has happened in Nigeria thus far since the rules came to be. Indeed, one of the initiatives that the SEC is jointly carrying out with the Central Bank of Nigeria and some private legal practitioners is actually to enact rules, a law that will help to deal with some challenges that the rules cannot deal with. And besides that, the SEC has also reviewed its own laws. That's the ISA 2007. And in that law, we've been able to incorporate parts of those issues that have continued to be problems, in the implementation of a smooth securitization process. And we hope that we're able to get National Assembly to pass that law this year in order for us to have a stronger and a better regulatory and legal environment for the functioning of the securitization in Nigeria. Move on, please. Next slide. The industry fundamentals for securitization is a technique used to convert illiquid assets. We've spoken about this, and it's a means to raise cash in the capital market and also for risk transfer. Let's move to the next slide. Speaking to the benefits again, I cannot stop speaking to the benefits because it's only when we know the benefits that we get interested. So to the investor, risk sharing, portfolio diversification, tailored investment, and for the originators, creation of liquidity, funding diversification, risk reduction, and regulatory capital relief. These are all the benefits that anyone who is interested, whether you are an investor or you are an originator, you certainly will be able to plug into any one of these benefits, and of course, you will be the better for it. Move on to the next slide, please. The process of securitization is illiquid assets are pooled and transformed into tradable interest-bearing financial instruments. Pooled assets may be homogeneous or heterogeneous. Interest and principal payments from the assets are passed onto the investor through securitization special purpose entity, and pooled assets may contain leases, residential mortgages, commercial mortgages, credit card mortgages, of course, student loans, and indeed farm loans, as the case may be, to help the process of securitization in the agricultural sector. Move on, please, to the next slide. The traditional securitization, types of asset-backed securities, because even the commodities are assets, as the case may be. You can call them commodities-backed securities, you can call them asset-backed securities, they still form part of the securitization. So consumer, these are the various types, and I'm sure it's something that we probably have seen before and have heard. So let's move on to the next slide in order to save time. Hello, the next slide, please. So in creating notes or securities, we are talking about risk and return profiles of tranche notes. Notes or bonds issued by the special purpose vehicle can be divided into slices, and these are just the structures that any of these notes that you want to create within the agricultural space can be made out of. Tranches can be paid, can pay fixed or floating rate interest and investment returns. Interest and principal repayment are located among the tranches in accordance to their seniority. Senior tranches are less risky, while junior tranches are more riskier. Also referred to as first loss tranches, are generally unrated and offer the highest investment yield. So the risk and return profile for every securitization instrument is clearly stated and noted. So as an investor, you have a choice of where you want to belong. You have a choice of where your appetite can take you. You have a choice of where your strength can take you. And so that is why securitization is actually a different meat, because it's available for everyone within the bracket that your risk profile actually places you into. Move on, please. Next slide, please. The true sale securitization process involves two steps. The originator identifies the assets or rights of which credit risk and legal ownership should be removed from his balance sheet and pooled. The issuer also of the pooled asset or rights finances the acquisition through the issuance of tradable and interest-bearing financial instruments that are sold to investors. I'm speaking to this because the onus of creating an instrument is actually on the originator. And once the originator is able to understand this concept, the originator is able to blend this into agricultural practices and agricultural finance needs. It's able to create instruments that appeals to the investors and appeals to all of those that will be interested in securitized product or securitized instrument. Move to the next slide, please. Well, this is an overview of the true sale transaction. This cannot, of course, it is available. I'm sure the slides will be made available. This explains exactly how the true sales transaction will take place. Move on, please, for want of time. Next slide. The next is synthetic securitization. Please speaking to the true sale. There's true sale, there's synthetic. Move on, move on. So synthetic, the process of synthetic securitization is described below. No, that is still part of the true sale transaction. Move on, please. Next slide. Then, one of the major interests of securitization is credit enhancement, because a challenge for most people is about what is the guarantee? How can I be sure that this instrument that I'm investing in has some level of guarantee, so to speak? And the only way you can provide such guarantee, so to speak, in the securitization is through credit enhancement, providing a leverage or a backup to that instrument in order that you can reduce the risk or the fear that's associated with such instrument. And that is done via credit enhancement over internal credit enhancement comes through over collateralization and subordination, while the external credit enhancement comes through insurance policies and letters of credit. And I'm happy to note that the agricultural space or the insurance companies are beginning to appreciate agriculture. They are beginning to provide policies and insurance policies for agri-based institutions, and are getting people more comfortable in that space in order that people are able to now do more investment and lash on their credit and the policies that are issued to the DCIPs and those operating within the sector. Move on, please. Next slide, please. This is important, and this is about where I may stop, but there's so much even to learn in front. So securitization parties, who are the parties involved? So one of the very beautiful things about securitization is that it produces opportunity for everybody in the space. So you have the originator, you have the investor, you have the trustee, you have the listing agent, you have the registrar, you have the custodian, you have the paying agent, you have the auditor, you have the legal, you have the exchanges, asset service and collateral managers. All of these are parties that are very, very, very important to this process. And you are providing jobs for them. You are providing opportunities for them. You are providing means of livelihood for them by the encouragement of securitization, and more so in the agricultural space. So it's important that we appreciate the value of securitization, and of course, the operational imperatives of securitization cannot be overemphasized in view of our goals to diversify the economy, in view of our desire to introduce more instruments into the market, in view of our belief that the economy has actually been operating on mono securities rather than multiple securities. Investors are looking out for where to invest their money, and of course a lot of them are falling prey to Ponzi schemes and all sorts of stuff just because we have not been able to provide alternative securities, alternative avenues for people to put their money in order to help the economy and help themselves in meeting their personal ambitions. So on this note, I want to thank AFEX for the opportunity to do this, and let's do it again some other time. Thank you so much.
Wow, subject matter experts indeed. Thank you so much, Mr. Agama. Thank you. We still have Mr. Agama with us, so please, all your questions, you've heard him, all the questions, please type it in for us. Right now, we'll move straight on to the panel session. In the panel session, of course, I have my subject matter expert, Mr. Agama Emomotimi. I have Mr. Sonny Ayere. I have Mr. Ayodeji Balogun, and then I have Mr. Funso Sobande. Let me speak briefly about Mr. Sonny Ayere. Mr. Sonny Ayere is the Chief Executive Officer at Don Lauren Merrifield Limited. He has amassed years of solid corporate and structured finance, corporate banking, and asset management experience, working with the following institutions in London: HSBC Bank, NatWest Bank, Bank of Montreal, BMO Nesbitt Burns, the International Finance Corporation, then UBA Group, amongst a few others. He possesses extensive cognate experience in fixed income capital markets. As such, has played a pivotal role in originating and executing several notable transactions in securitizations and other various structured finance related transactions internationally and in Nigeria. Mr. Ayere serves on several capital market boards, including the SEC Committee on Market Structure and Reforms, amongst others. Mr. Ayere, you are welcome, sir. Sorry, just one moment. Okay, a brief about Mr. Ayodeji Balogun, who will be a panel member. Ayodeji Balogun is the Chief Executive Officer of AFEX, where he is leading a team of experts leveraging technology, innovative finance, and inclusive agriculture to connect agri-SMEs and smallholder farmers to commodity and financial markets. He holds an MBA from Lagos Business School, Global CEO Africa from Iyese Business School, and a certificate in creative leadership from the THNK School of Creative Leadership. Mr. Balogun has almost 20 years experience trading across West Africa, as well as in building and scaling businesses across sub-Saharan Africa. He serves on several capital market boards and works with several institutions on food security and financing agriculture. Last but not the least is Mr. Funso Sobande. Right now, I do not have the bio ready with me, but during the course or at the end of it, I will share Mr. Funso Sobande's bio. So may I please ask that all our panelists switch on their videos so we can see the panelists. Thank you very much. You're all very welcome. Do I see Mr. Sonia Ayera? Okay, he's presently not here with us. So, but we'll carry on. He'll probably just join us. You're all very welcome. And Mr. Sobande, it's great to see you. Thank you very much. Okay, so please send in your questions. While researching and looking at this, I have a number of questions. And what I did was looking at the value chain and before considering the markets, I looked at 3 critical areas that will need to be effective for commodities to trade and be available in the desired quality and quantity. The first of this is input availability. So what I'll do is I'll just throw the questions open and any of the panelists can take the questions. Now, from input availability, since 1956 to now, we have been trying to address the issue of input availability in terms of quality and quantity. So my question is, what should we now do differently? The second question on input availability is, how do we make quality inputs available to farmers in a timely manner?
And where should we start from?
You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. It's really, really, really great one. And I must appreciate our 2 foremost speakers, Mrs. Daisy Ekineh, for always being kind and being generous with their time, and also continuing to engage and push the commodities market and the entire ecosystem primarily. And I am almost calling him Dr. Agama now, after the excellent delivery on securitization. So, it's been a father to us in the capital markets, and that there's no other word that describes it better. On inputs, and I like where you started from, 1956. So we've had the input problem even before we had our independence. There's been great years, there's been tough years, but what we'll see is that there's been different era across the entire input system. And, looking at it, so one of the things we saw is, we had a lot of the foreign players play here in Nigeria up until the mid-80s. Then we had Syngenta in the country, we had AFEX, we had a number of the big leading global names in terms of input genetics, fertilizer production, and other products as well play here. And as we went into the mid-80s with the crisis that the country went through at the time, And then towards 86, 87, when the marketing boards were collapsed, the huge demand that the marketing board, which essentially it's a pseudo-controlled exchange, in some way. It was a one focal market that everybody sold to and everybody bought from. So when the market board left, there wasn't that structured demand. There were other foreign exchange related nationalization and other policies, and almost all those foreign companies left the country. And that continued, and we had a system that was pretty much led by contracting vendors and state-run fertilizer procurement. There was the third era, I would say, in around 2010, 2011, 2012, when there was the advent of the GES, the Growth Enhancement Scheme. That sort of pivoted the fertilizer subsidy from a wholesale trading subsidy where government bought expensive and sold cheap into something that went into the wallets of the smallholder farmer, and the farmer had the cash, and that cash went into his production. I must also mention that sometimes in the mid-80s, leading in the 80s, there were so many, almost every state had a fertilizer blending plant, and all of them stopped functioning leading into the 90s. So by mid-90s throughout to 2020, even actually up to 2010, for those 20 years, only about 4 fertilizer blending plants worked in the country as a proxy for the entire input value chain. Then, with GES, we had a surge. I think in almost a decade, that was the first time we used close to 1 million metric tons of fertilizer. And then financing also went to its all-time high at about 5% of the entire credits. Agriculture, 5% of total credits went to agriculture. And that induced subsidy made fertilizer more available. On a global scale, fertilizer consumption moved from about 12 kg per hectare to somewhere over 24, 25 kg per hectare. But we need to put it in context that, a country like, Brazil uses about 150 kg per hectare of fertilizer. So even though there was an increase, it was way, way, way below what we should do to have optimal productivity. So we had another era of the input program around that. That changed again with the current administration when they introduced the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative. And that sort of restructured the whole fertilizer again into some sort of government-controlled smart subsidy of some sort, where government had an alliance with the government of Morocco to buy fertilizer cheap and then bring it into the country. And that's sort of where we are today. And there's some reform going on currently around that again. But these are the different phases. Now, along all those phases have been the farmer continually being at a loss, and the country also because of productivity. Nigeria average productivity of cereals is about 1.7, 1.8 metric tons per hectare, as compared with other countries that are around our, equivalent land quality, with about 3.5, 4.5 metric tons per hectare, with the potential of up to 12, 15 tons per hectare if you had every other thing working for it. So, and that's leading to the inflation, food basket inflation, leading into demand, food imports bill, and the demand for forex for us to feed ourselves. And that's sort of the input landscape, taking it from 1950 as much as I can know.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Balogun. Do I have comments from Mr. Sobande and Mr. Agama? You're muted, Mr. Sobande, if you want to speak.
Yes.
Right.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate in this seminar and webinar. And I think for me, I just wanted to highlight a bit on, when we're talking about securitization and the use of structured finance in agriculture, there are certain preconditions for the successful use of application of those kind of products. First and foremost, there has to be the macroeconomic framework, which needs to be stable. There also needs to be a strong institutional and legal framework. I think Nigeria has a pass mark in terms of the development of the financial system. Then we need to also inculcate the supportive cultural and social values, including the willingness of business partners to trust and to be accountable to one another. And then the agri sector on its own has to be profitable. There has been a lot of interest, you know, in the agri sector and in the agri supply chain in general in Nigeria. So having said that, what are the key issues when we talk about the agri securitization? One is the basic problem has to do with the numerous number of small subsistence farmers that often either have no collateral or can't access credit or investment. On the other hand, you also have banks and financial institutions who are kind of unfamiliar with the way and conduct of the agri-business and the way it's conducted in Nigeria. These farmers also have little or no access to equity financing. And then there's the issue about credit ratings. So when you look at the operating environment and stuff like that, there's still a lot to be desired in terms of the financial, legal, accounting, and regulatory and other design structures that will support the boost in terms of agri securitization. So the process would involve creating a number of trust building mechanisms that will replace the obligations of the originator. Let's not forget that we're trying to take an asset, securitize it, and then on-sell it to investors for a fixed rate of return. So the first principal issue we will be considering is, what is it we're securitizing in Nigeria if we have all these problems with the farmers, with collateral, with this and that? And I think it will boil down in the end to a significant amount of trust. Second issue is, what class of assets do we want to make up this securitized pool? You know, what is the asset class? What can a primary producer offer to an investor in return for cash flows or for the injection of investment into his business? Are we talking about the land he was farming on, in which case we're talking about farm agreements? Are we talking about the plant and equipment, if he has plant and equipment, you know, that is using on the farm? Are we talking about a share of the crop or the livestock proceeds? So really, what really is it we intend to securitize? Now, the other issues that exist with the securitization challenge in Nigeria have to do with the fact that investors are normally looking for systems that they don't have to focus on. They're trying to have a moral hazard problem. And so they want to ensure that the mortgages that, the assets in which they're securitizing are registered, they are supervised, and that, you know, there is no right to ultimate recourse to the securitized assets that are being held for them. You know, one way in which other economies have tried to address this problem is to use rural debt as a short-term form of obtaining loans and advances. And these rural debts are normally structured against a season's crop delivery and so on and so forth. But beyond that, how do you extend the cycle into longer range or longer term debt instruments? And I think the last point I would like to highlight here has to do with the design of the products that will appeal to this market. Most of the investors in securitized assets, superannuation funds and pension funds, that kind of thing. And they would need to be promised a rate of return that is attractive and acceptable both to the investors and fund users. So when we're talking about applying securitization to primary production, most primary producers or farmers experience considerable year-on-year fluctuation, both in cash flows and some are largely determined by extraneous factors such as weather, harvest, and commodity prices. So there are quite a number of challenges that still need to be addressed. And in terms of addressing some of these problems, I think we need to look more about how we can securitize the process versus actually looking at the farmer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sobande. Before I move on, let me give a brief bio of Mr. Funso Sobande. Mr. Funso Sobande has over 27 years diverse and rich experience spanning the financial services and manufacturing industry, which he brings to bear on the board. He holds a BSc in Economics from the University of Ibadan and a Master of Finance from the Strathclyde University, Glasgow, United Kingdom. He was President, Money Market Association of Nigeria between 2004 and 2005. He has attended several programs in Nigeria and abroad. His experience spans Group Treasurer, Flour Mills of Nigeria PLC, CEO, Interchange Supplies Management Limited, Chief Dealer, Fiscal and Financial Strategist, Central Bank of Nigeria, Treasurer and Group Head Global Markets, Bank PHB, Group Head Corporate Finance and Treasury, Westcom Group, GM Head of Fixed Income and Debt Capital Market, Origination, Standard Chartered Bank Nigeria Limited, and a Director in Stanbic Equities Limited. Mr. Funso Sobande, we welcome you again, sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay, and thank you for that overview of the securitization and what must be done. You did mention.
Okay.
Yes,
fine.
yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah,
please, sir. Go on, sir.
To chip in. Yeah, so
yes, sir.
Oftentimes the challenge we have is when we look at the concepts, we look at it so that's a very, very difficult concept. That's, for want of a better word. And possibly, if I have my way, I will look for a way to change the name, securitization, so that people do not see it so far off or far away from our normal lifestyle or what we do. What we are saying is, how do you unlock finance through innovative, ingenious ways? What do you need to do to do what's seemingly called abnormal to be able to raise money? That's what securitization is. So immediately we begin to break this down into granular forms where the common man understands that you are not, it's not an attempt to get them to do what they don't want to do. And that's why you decided to call it the name you were calling it. It's like, giving a dog a bad name so that you can kill it. No. So let's take it very, very granular, and we'll understand that securitization is an activity that happens amongst us every day. But besides that, for the regulator, what our responsibility is to provide an enabling environment, is to provide rules and regulations and parameters guiding the process and making sure that both the investor and the investee are all protected. And the kind of commodities or the kind of instruments that are coming to the market are instruments that you can see through. They are not opaque. The reason for the crisis that we had was because of the opaque nature of the instruments. You cannot follow the instruments from the beginning to the ending. In agriculture, we call it traceability, that there should be traceability. Once there is traceability, then you are able to gain confidence in what you are doing. So practically you're saying, okay, I have these that I'm expecting. Then because I have these that I'm expecting and I'm not going to get it now, and because I know that you are expecting something and I am sure of what you are expecting, I, on the premise of what you are expecting, can give you something on what you want. That's securitization. So not until that is, explained down to the people that are going to be involved, then we'll be having a problem. But why is it important that we are encouraged about what we want to do in the agricultural space? It is because it will be far-reaching. For other spaces, it is sophisticated. But for the agricultural space, it is far-reaching. And once it gets to that point where you are able to unlock finance by the creation of products through receivables, then you are exposing that industry to a financial revolution. And without money, without funding for the smallholder farmers, and without ways and means to do this through input finance and all other, methods that we can look at to getting the smallholder farmers, involved in this process, we are not able to go anywhere. So clearly, for us, as a parting shot, the regulator is ready to provide the enabling environment. We already have rules. We are improving on the rules. And we are also heavy on educating people to understanding exactly what we are doing, what they ought to do, and what they ought to know in investing. Because take it from me, the number of Ponzi schemes, rising up in this country every day, and the number of people that are gullible enough, including sophisticated investors that are putting their monies into this, is becoming something of very, very serious worry. So the earlier we try to create instruments and avenues for people to invest and ways for them to understand that you can do these things legitimately, the better for us all and the better for the economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. On that note, I think I'll begin to take questions because we have a couple of questions from the participants. My first question is from Ekineh Michael Aniadiben, and this goes to Mr. Agama. He says, isn't the lack of local investors' interest and low transactional liquidity in the general securitization market due to the fact that Nigerians connect these products with leveraged products with hidden clauses? You're muted, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ayadibe. Well, the truth about it is that we must not do investments when you do not know what the investments are. It's a wrong point. The day you see, like a carpenter trying to structure a security instrument or a tailor selling finance to you, then you know that there's problem, right? Finance is meant for professionals. There are dictates to professional finance, business. So if you do not know it, you don't know it. If you know it, you know it. So what is important is that those clauses, those, fine, thin lines are supposed to be read by a professional. Because as an investor, you probably do not have the patience to understand where those things are. And that is why for every prospectus, it is said that this document is important. If you are in doubt, consult professionals, your stockbroker, your financial advisor, your accountant. These are people that are trained to do this, to read through for you. So, and if you know that you do not have the strength, the appetite, and knowledge for direct purchase of equity, you have the mutual funds. So you can actually have securitized mutual funds where people who do not have knowledge and have knowledgeable fund managers are able to invest in. So the next thing we should be thinking about as capital market operators, can we have a securitized mutual fund? There you are able to structure a product that fits into the retail investors, understanding the nuances and providing safety for them. And that will be a beautiful thing to happen.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. There's another interesting question here, comment question. And Ekineh Aneke says, securitization is meant to create liquidity, but it does not remove the risk in the underlying asset. No, it does not remove the risks in the underlying assets for agriculture. Do you think securitization will be any attractive, considering the fact that investors will demand a high discount or returns on agricultural tranches? That is, if they will be interested in that sort of exposure. Or do we have an infrastructure gap that needs to be filled before securitization can be a big goal?
Let me jump on this before any other person comes again. So I spoke about internal credit enhancement and external credit enhancement. And I also spoke about the new knowledge of insurance companies providing insurance policies for agriculture and commodities market. So all of these are ways to de-risk the products and of course de-risk the system. So once you have all of those kind of guarantees and enhancements and they are de-risked, then we are safer. And for any de-risking to happen, there must be a proper study and understanding of the product. Specialists will be involved, understanding the cycle of agriculture, understanding how the receivables happen. So once all of this happen, it will just be a smooth sail. And that is why we speak to the issue of professionalism, we speak to the issue of knowledge, we speak to the issue of actually reading. A lot of times people don't read. We are just within our comfort zone and remain there forever. Yet we want to improve. It is impossible, practically impossible for that to happen. So once we do all of this and we embrace professionalism in this sector, then we will get to the place we want to get to. Agriculture is no more agriculture as it is. It is agribusiness. And for agribusiness, you must put your heart where your money is.
Thank you. And just to take a rider on that as well. So agriculture, let's not forget, this is 25% of our economy. And so there's, we can't do away with it. And if you eat every day, then you're part of the sector, risky or not. But then, if you really look at from a securitization standpoint, so you don't have to securitize the farm, with all the, security risk and things like that that we associate with it. So for instance, you could do it, there are 3 forms of commodity securitization that is quite common, but there's so many more ways you could do it. And that's the beauty, the innovation it brings to the capital market is the beauty of securitization itself. So in one instance, you could actually take the physical commodities underlying, bring in 3 or 4 underlying commodities, and then securitize, create a product on the back of those. And that has a value, and that value is marked to market on a daily basis. And that creates a new instrument that is a tradable and investable instrument. And that's securitization. Now, you don't have production risk, you don't have market risk, you're essentially just faced with the physical commodity risk, which can be managed, and then the financing risk, the price risk on top of that. Secondly, you could go in and then take derivatives of commodities, and you bundle a number of derivatives contracts together, and you have a new derivatives contract that is then tradable. You could bring in indexes and then create indexes into a cocktail derivatives product, for instance, and that is an investable asset. In that case, you don't even have, the agriculture production is almost 3 steps away from where you are as a product. So it increases your risk. It also increases it gives you diversity. So you don't have exposure to one type of failure. The third part where you could look at is actually trade transactions. So you have exports, for instance, and then you have a receivable, you have LPOs, or you have invoice discounted, and that could become the basis of building a securitized production. So rather than look at the agricultural production, you're looking at the transactions and the receivables ensuing after those transactions are consummated. And it's easy to tie those things together, tie the cash flows together, and then build an instrument that is tradable or investable on top of that. So, I mean, it doesn't say it is not risky. It doesn't say it doesn't have the risk, But like Mr. Agama and Mr. Funso had said, the physical product itself, this is a new instrument, and it's the way that you actually dip in the markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balogun. Thank you very much, Mr. Balogun. Mr. Sobande, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say that perhaps what I wanted to add to what Mr. Balogun has said is the fact that, there are many things you could, I did mention that we need to securitize the process, not necessarily the product, like Mr. Balogun has pointed out. There are many things you can do, and he talked about derivatives, and I was wondering because Mr. Emomotimi has said, when you talk about securitization, it looks like a big word. Derivatives even makes people wonder, but yes, you could use a commodity futures exchange, as the form or one of the means of securitizing, where at the end of the day, the counterparty, the investor, is taking on the risk of the exchange and not the risk of the farmer or the risk of the product at the end of it. You could also look at warehousing and build securitization around the security of warehouses, product moving in and out of the warehouse. But to bring it down, just to make sure that we're carrying everybody along, the essential thing in a securitization process is that an issuer looks at a marketable financial instrument that he can create from a pool of various assets, right? He packages those assets and then offers it to investors, for a fixed term of return. So what really happens is that originator gathers the data on the assets that he wants to de-risk and then constructs them into a portfolio, and then out of the income streams of this portfolio, he sells to issuers in a manner that the securities become very tradable, just like we have, it could be over a secure exchange, either a commodities exchange or a similar kind of exchange. And in that way, that liquidity is created because you have a security that you can buy or sell, and all the other risks have been taken care of.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sobande. Thank you so much. I think we'll take just one last question before we close out the session because our time is fast spent. And this is from Mrs. Modupe Mujota. And she says, the challenge posed by the land ownership and title issues, as well as cost and procedural impediments in obtaining title, must also be looked into. How can we streamline procedure and costs, as well as the unraveling of historical land title issues to ensure that all farmland across the country can be treated the same reasonably to facilitate seamless participation by smallholder farmers?
Let me quickly address one point, and then maybe the other panelists also have something to chip in. We've been talking about the Land Use Act for years in Nigeria. And the key to unlocking that, in my view, I know at some point there was such an initiative in Abuja, this whole thing about doing the geoscaping of the total land mass of Nigeria, and build a digital database for certificates of occupancy and that sort of thing. So if we create that kind of electronic land registry, it then becomes possible to what's the word? Dematerialize a C of O, as it were. Just as we did with the shares, you dematerialize a C of O and it becomes a tradable asset where you don't have to perfect title until and unless you desire to do so. It continues to trade as an asset, over an exchange. And in that manner, you then allow, because before the asset is dematerialized, there's a scrutinization process to determine genuine ownership and so on and so forth. So that once the asset starts to trade on that exchange, it then becomes a commodity as well. I think that would help if we were able to digitalize and dematerialize the land registry.
Yeah, just to also put, thank you very much, Mr. Sobande. And to put another example, particularly one that touched the smallholder farmer as an example here. So we have a product now, and that product is, it's been on the exchange for about 4 or 5 years now. And it's called the input notes. So what we do is to, the smallholder farmer, the cost of origination, organizing, training, and everything you need to do for him is actually expensive. So we have systems that provide all of these things at wholesale, organize them into groups, organize them into cells, give them the training, create the trust deeds, register them as cooperatives, do the extension work, and then we bring in the inputs that they need to be able to access. Now, the problem is the farmer wants to take a loan of 150,000 or 80,000 naira for the year. Now, it's very expensive for a banker to come in and go one farm to the other to be able to go in and lend to them, which is a challenge. So what we do is that we take them at the cooperative level, 20 farmers registering, taking in a loan of 100,000 each together. Then we take about 50 cooperatives and we string them together into a note issuance. And then you have a number of note issuance at the union level, and these notes are then listed on the exchange. Now, when you have the exchange, there's somebody that is a sponsor for that union, either the union itself or you have a private company that is a sponsor for the union, and that person lists the product on the exchange on the primary market for people to come in and then invest against. So on the other side, as an investor, if you are an institutional investor, you will see 100 million issuance for notes for farmers of this cooperative name out of Kaduna or out of Niger State or out of your state. And you're investing against a fixed income or a discount instrument, right? Which looks like what you know how to do. 270-day, discounted 16%, and you invest in and you get your par at maturity. If you're a retail HNI type investor, you see on our app, COMEX, on your phone, you can log in, you can take a small bite of that chunk and invest 100,000 naira into an input note, and your money goes to combine with a number of pool other investors, and that goes into then invest and finance the farmer. So ultimately, when you're looking at it, you're looking at a securitized instrument, but on the back of that securitized instrument, today it's over 200,000 farmers across 22 states of Nigeria, across close to 1,000 communities that are getting loans to go to farm. When we looked at last year, we financed over 38,000 farmers, and that provided food for 4.4 million people for the year in terms of the plate on the table. This year, we're looking to finance over 100,000 farmers through the same securitized instruments. So, I mean, finance is what it is, and the capital market is what it is, but it is not purely, and I think that's the unique advantage that the commodities exchange brings, that, we are solving real life problems. We are addressing and provide liquidity to the real sector. We are providing these instruments are going to finance producers, processors that need to produce food that comes to our table for us to eat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balogun. I must apologize. We must absolutely stop now because we're 9 minutes over the 1:30 objective that we had. Please send in your questions to contact us at afexnigeria.com. Again, I repeat, contact us at afexnigeria.com. Your questions will be attended to, and I'm sure AFEX will definitely have a second session of this. So please note that the commodities market can be leveraged to access capital and also deepen the financial market. Other countries are way ahead in this, and we need to build our own market. So thank you so much. I want to thank especially Mr. Agama Emomotimi. Thank you, Madam Daisy Ekineh. Thank you to our panelists, Mr. Funso Sobande, Mr. Balogun. I'm sorry we were not able to have Mr. Sonia Ayere here, but I'm sure he will join us another time. It's been an enlightening session, and I want to say a big thank you for joining us. Do have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.